Hello, and welcome to Senior Code Review Buddy. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to talk about the current state of my deliberate practice app. It's changed a fair amount since I last chatted about it, so I wanted to walk you through the recent changes, my reasoning for those changes, and sort of how I just tried to figure out the best path forward for this project. First off, I'll admit that despite really believing this app can be valuable to me and wanting to use it, I haven't used it. I really needed to get the application on my phone, either as an Android app or a web page. And until I did that, I just wasn't going to use it. I thought a website would probably be a better choice than an Android app, for me at least, as I think I can get the website up and running faster. And at this time, I don't see a big advantage for the Android app to counteract that speed I'd get going up and running. With this vague direction in mind, I decided to do a bit of research on what tooling to use. To start, I wanted something that could easily interface with the code I already had, so I decided to stick with Python. I Googled Python web frameworks and poked around the various links and tried some related searches. I spent maybe 10 minutes here skimming at a high level to see what frameworks jumped out at me and seemed worth further investigation. At this point, I ended up with 4 options that seemed to meet my initial and pretty vague criteria. There was Flask, Fast API, Django, and Web2Py. Of these 4, I had done some small projects years ago with Flask and Django, so I had a bit of experience with them, but overall I'd rate myself as a novice for all of these frameworks. Didn't really know the pros or cons of any of them. I then spent some time reading the high-level summaries about each of these frameworks to see which sounded like the best for my use case. Fast API was the first one I decided to drop. It seems to focus on just the APIs and didn't seem like it would be helpful with displaying the web pages themselves, which is what I'm hoping to do, so it didn't really seem like the right fit for my use case. Web2Python seemed like it could be reasonable, but when I looked at its GitHub repo, it only had about 2,000 stars on it versus the 60,000 plus that Django and Flask had. So it seemed like it might not have as much documentation and support, and it would probably take me a little longer to ramp up on, so I decided to drop it as well. And then, as I was poking around Flask and Django, I happened to stumble on Python's web framework page, which lists a huge amount of Python web frameworks. And it's just got so much information here. And if you look, it's got popular full stack frameworks compared to other full stack frameworks, popular non-full stack frameworks, other non-full stack frameworks. I really wish I'd stumbled on this page sooner. It seems really helpful. And if we look at the popular full stack frameworks, which I think is what I want, Django appears right there. So this seems like a good argument to probably use it. And if we look to see where Flask is, yeah, it's in popular but non-full stack frameworks, so that seems like a good enough reason for me to, I think, pick Django over Flask. Although I did also note that Web2Py also appears in the same section, so there could be an argument for using that still, but I think, as I've already talked about, because Django just has so much more support around it, there's probably a lot more documentation, so it's probably an easier choice for me. I'll admit that my process of picking Django might not seem as detailed as you'd expect. I didn't really dig into the trade-offs between the frameworks or read multiple analysis. I just read a few high-level summaries, looked at the GitHub star count, and called it a day. And I think, given how I've planned out my project so far, this is a reasonable choice. I only have a vague idea of what I want my deliberate practice app to look like, and that means I only have a vague idea of its end state. And I can't really make informed decisions around which framework best aligns with my goals if I don't have super clear goals. And if I spent more time researching the frameworks and really digging into them, that's not going to change. So I spent just a little bit of time, maybe 1 to 2 hours total, and picked something that seems like it'll work. Now, maybe later I'll look back on this decision with regret, as this choice will have caused some huge issues down the line. But I think I'm better off at this point just picking a tool and moving forward, as I don't think I'm equipped to make a good decision because I don't know what I want the future to look like yet. So with the web framework decision made, I spent some time digging into Django. I found the official tutorial and worked through all of the content. This did take a fair amount of time, but this helped me get a sense of how Django worked and how I think it should be used with my project. One thing that I hadn't realized until I worked through the tutorials was how integrated it was with databases. I initially planned on using most of my original code with this initial Django release, including my little hacky sort of test settings files. But then I realized that this was probably going to be more trouble than it was worth. I had expected to migrate away from these text files to something more complex soon anyhow, so I figured I might as well bite the bullet and just start using a database with Django right away, instead of adding a bunch of scaffolding to temporarily getting my old code to work with this. Now, this meant that basically all my previous code got thrown away. So does that mean I wasted a lot of time by starting with this command line interface and not using Django right away? Maybe. But while I think you could say I did, I don't mind, because writing out that command line interface had me thinking about the flow and the model structure. So while the code was unused, it helped me think about some ideas and structures that are carrying over to the new version. And it also got me out a version that I could use faster, even though I didn't really use it. But when I was starting, I didn't know that the command line interface really just wasn't going to work for me. I only found that out because I got something in front of me quickly. Along with this framework decision, I wrote down some other choices I made and my ideal work order in sort of a rough bullet point list. Basically, this was my rough outline of how I was going to handle the migration from a CLI interface to the Django interface. There were a few decisions I made there as well, like what database format to use. I decided I would use PostgreSQL, and how I would run the Django tests. I decided I was going to stick with PyTest instead of using their built-in test framework. And I started working on it. And while it was going at an okay pace, it was looking like a lot more work than I'd originally hoped for when I decided I wanted to have a web interface. And I ended up going back on one of the decisions I just told you to speed things up. I decided to go back on my database choice and stick with SQLite instead of PostgreSQL. I picked PostgreSQL because it sounded like the best choice of the options that Django natively supports, and I know that it's used by a lot of places, so it would probably be nice to get some more experience with it. And SQLite, well, it's in the name, light. I probably need something stronger and better than that. But then I realized that using PostgreSQL required a lot of extra work. Like, I actually had to create the database myself. Django doesn't do that automatically. I knew, because of the Django tutorials, that using SQLite with it is trivial. It basically handles everything itself. And was I actually going to hit any issues or limits with SQLite today? Doubtful. I then poked around a bit to see how difficult it is to migrate database formats with Django, and doesn't seem too bad. While there are some differences, it broadly seems like Django does a great job of separating the database implementations from your client code, so you can switch without too much trouble. So I realized that I was probably better off sticking with SQLite for now, and only worrying about migrating to another database format if I actually had a need for it, or if I really wanted to spend the time learning that other format and digging into it. And after making that decision, I was able to wrap up the initial version of my app for deliberate practice in fairly short order. So let's go take a look at it now. So first off, we've got this admin page where we can go and see the activities, and we can easily add a new activity to practice. Senior Code Review Buddy practice. We just save it, and that's all that's required. This is basically all built on the Django framework, and it only required me setting a few values to do this, so this has been pretty great. All right, so now that we've got two activities in here, let's actually go and practice those. This is the main landing page of the practice location, and we can see practice results, and we can start a practice session. Let's look at the results first, and it just says show practice results, but it's never going to show anything here. I haven't added any of this functionality yet, but we can practice a session. So let's go there. And all right, we see that this will be our 5th practice session. The session's currently active. We haven't done any practices in this set yet. I guess that should be session, not set. And okay, so it wants us to practice the Senior Code Review Buddy practice and then give it a score. We'll say it was 50%. We save it. All right, yeah, we now see that, yeah, we have done one practice set, and we now have a new activity to practice, and we can give it a score. And yeah, it just sort of goes up, and then once we've done enough, we can just say end practice session, and that's it. It's very basic, but hopefully this is enough that I'll actually start using it on my phone now. Thanks for going through that with me today. Hopefully it was interesting to see how I worked through the various choices I encounter. What do you think about my choice to use Django? Is there another framework you think I should have used instead? If so, please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. If you have any comments, code you'd like me to review, or ideas you'd like me to talk about, please leave a comment below or reach me at chris@seniorcodereviewbuddy.com. Thanks, and have a great day.